Hey all, it's John again. We've moved from Cumberland Station over to the Ridgely Shop Complex over in West Virginia, and I thought it'd be very befitting if we stood here with an old friend, the 734. As you can see, the tender and the engine are separated for storage purposes only, and someday we hope to see steam again. Well, standing around with old friends, I'd like to introduce you now to the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad's curator, Mr. John Hankey.
Thank you, John. I'm standing here with one of our new friends, the tender of former C&O Railway number 1309, the 2662 Malley, that we hope to have up and running early next year, doing the work that 734 did for so many years. In July of 2014, Western Maryland Scenic Railroad and the B&O Railroad Museum in Baltimore completed an agreement to bring the 1309 to Cumberland for complete overhaul and use by the Western Maryland Scenic, hopefully for the next 35, 45, 50 years. The engine arrived in July and immediately entered the shop and began the process of disassembly. It took about a year to take the locomotive apart and give it a good assessment, figure out what was right, what was wrong, what work needed to be done, and then it was time for the planning. The first major task we undertook was the tender. Badly corroded after years out in the weather, it required a great deal of heavy steel work, basic work, but very precise fabrication for new tank bottom, new tank sides, new deck, and many, many patches inside, new baffles in the water space, new patches in the coal space. And now that tender is just about as good as new, as built by Baldwin in 1949. In some cases, the disassembly was relatively easy. The locomotive was built in 1949. It's a relatively new machine. And in some cases, the parts came apart nice and easy and clean. The tender deck, for example, was like new. The front truck, the pony truck for the front engine, was in great shape. It came apart very nicely. The bearings looked good. The frame looked good. It only required needle scaling and cleaning up, lubrication and reassembly. In other cases, we weren't quite so lucky. The spring rigging and driving boxes, the basic running gear, both the front and the rear engine, were in pretty rugged shape. As they used to say about some horses, the C&O Railway rode the 1309 hard and put it away wet. The engine was tired. The heart of the locomotive is its boiler, and the 1309 was in very good shape. The biggest issues were the outside shell, where over many years water soaking through the boiler lagging, the insulation, had created some corrosion on the outside. The inside of the front end was remarkably clean and clear and structurally sound. We're looking at the front tube sheet, where the tubes and flues that pass through the water space come out into the smoke box and the hot gases go up the stack. The boiler is the place where the water is turned to steam by the heat of the coal fire. The firebox itself is where the potential heat of coal is turned into actual thermal energy and transferred to the water in the boiler. This is nothing more than a big tea kettle on wheels, but a very big tea kettle that goes very, very hot. As big and sturdy and heavy as locomotive boilers are, especially modern ones, they still wear out. In this case, small cracks on the inside sheet in one of the corners of the firebox. So what we have to do is literally cut out the offending section, take out the stay bolts and rivets, cut it out, set it aside, bend a new piece of metal, trim it to shape, cut it, rivet it, weld it back in to where the patch is as good as new metal, and the integrity of the firebox is the equivalent of a new locomotive. This is the kind of complex boiler work we're doing at the moment. We'll wrap this up in a couple of weeks and then begin the process of putting in new stay bolts where needed. One of the most critical aspects of a locomotive restoration is looking at all the several hundred stay bolts that hold the two sheets of the firebox and combustion chamber in proper alignment. Sometimes the stay bolts are so corroded or so rusted shut that they have to be replaced. This is a flexible stay bolt. We're going to be replacing nearly 300 of these things. We have to cut them out on one end, then drive them out and replace them with new, similarly sized, custom-made stay bolts that will, again, make the locomotive as good as new. Locomotives are about making steam and moving steam and sending it to where it needs to be. These are the sizes and kinds of pipes we're dealing with, expansion joints and complex couplings that bring the steam from the boiler down to the cylinders. This is the high-pressure rear engine. Then the steam is directed to a pipe that goes to the low-pressure front engine, and once used, it goes up the stack as water vapor. The Western Maryland shop is fairly tight. We've never had enough room, but we do have most of the machine tools we need to do this kind of work. Locomotives are basically metallic objects that require a lot of metal forming, cutting, turning, milling, planing, and these machines are all set up to do the kind of traditional heavy steam locomotive work that we did for the 734 and that now we're doing for the 1309. Almost every railroad shop, even now, has a Bridgeport machine, a machine tool that does many different things, functioning as a drill press and a milling machine and a shaper. Ours is a classic piece, probably from the 1950s. Steam locomotives are big, heavy, difficult to work on beasts. Almost everything is made of steel, almost everything is over scale, and that means that the tools and the effort it takes to work on these things is equally oversized and difficult and heavy. Almost everything about a steam locomotive is custom made. There are very few parts that are machine made or factory made. These rods were forged in a giant steam hammer at Baldwin Locomotive in Philadelphia by several men with chain falls and tools and asbestos suits. It was hot, hard work building it. It's hot, hard work rebuilding it. The southwest corner of the shop building may just look like a jumble of parts, but we know where every piece goes, every piece has its place. We're looking at piston valves and brake cylinders, parts of the steam delivery system, the kinds of odds and ends that have been rebuilt and are ready for reassembly. By modern locomotive standards, the 1309 is a medium-sized locomotive. It's not too small, not too large. The Union Pacific Big Boy is much, much larger, for example. But for a couple of years at least, this will be the largest, most powerful steam locomotive in service in the world. And you can see from this view just what we have to work with. About 50 feet of boiler and firebox and a whole lot of rivets.